There are, generally speaking, four ways in which landlords may increase rents. First, let's talk about capital improvements. A capital improvement is a landlord's expenditure of money for repairs in a building, substantial major repairs in the building, or improvements to the building. The way we determine if an improvement is major is there's two ways. First is by the raw dollar value of the expenditure, and second is by just relying on everyone's favorite entity, the IRS. If the IRS will let you take depreciation for an improvement on real property, in all likelihood it will qualify as a capital improvement in most rent-controlled jurisdictions. Now, a capital improvement increase is not a dollar-for-dollar increase. And so if you spend $100,000 improving the, let's say, heating system to a given building, you are not necessarily entitled to $100,000 from each tenant over the lifetime of the tenancy. Instead, most capital improvement formulas provide for a fixed rate of return against an improvement. For example, $1.50 per every 1,000 that's spent. A capital improvement increase is, generally speaking, only valid for the lifetime of the improvement. And so we would rely on everyone's favorite organization, the IRS, to tell us what the useful life of an improvement is for depreciation purposes. And then we'll use that useful life to determine how long a capital improvement increase will stay on a tenant's rent. Capital improvement increases do not become part of the basic rent. And so spending $100,000 to secure, let's say, a $10 increase in rent across every tenant, that does not become the tenant's permanent base rent. And so later increases, for example, for the Consumer Price Index, won't include as the basis for the increase the capital improvement. The aggregate rent the tenant pays will include the capital improvement, but it won't become part of the basic rent. That leaves us with a formula that the tenant aggregate rent is the sum of the basic rent plus whatever the approved capital improvement amount is. That yields the aggregate rent, which is what's paid by the tenant. Capital improvement increases can exist in two forms. There are vacancy capital improvements. Those are capital improvements made in between tenancies when the building is vacant. And then there are occupied capital improvements. These are improvements made when a tenant is already occupying a given apartment. And generally speaking, because of this occupancy, the recapture rate for an occupied capital improvement is lower. The philosophical underpinning, I guess you'd say, for that lower occupancy return or recapture rate is because if $100,000 is spent repairing or renovating a two-bedroom apartment that turns it from something dilapidated into something consistent with modern standards, the incoming tenant who agrees to pay an increased rent has the opportunity to say, I agree that this increase is valid. I agree that this apartment has been improved from its prior condition, and so I'm making an agreement, or I'm knowingly agreeing to pay this increased amount because I see what I'm getting.